Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. I want to introduce you to a couple of new products. Old one anyway. This has been around a little bit. This is the Trend Diamond Plate. And I just want to walk you through something that you may need to do when it's first being used, but I'll cover that in a second. What I want to show you is this new 4.5 that Woodriver, Woodcraft, just released a few months ago. Now I'm opening this for the first time. You'll see when we open it up, it hasn't been taken out of the plastic yet. And this is not being sponsored by Woodcraft, even though I work as a consultant for them and helping them develop planes, or hand tools. They didn't ask me to do this. I'm doing it strictly out of wanting to pass on some good information, because I think this is the best they've come up with so far. This is known as a smooth plane. So 10 inches long, uses a 2 3/8 inch iron. Now the only downside is it gets packed in this disgusting, whatever it is, oil of some sort. So I find the easiest way to get it off is to use some paint thinner. In other words, it takes too much elbow grease. The paint thinner breaks it down pretty quick. This is patterned after the original Stanley Bedrock 4.5. It has a blade that measures 125 thousandths of an inch thick, which means it doesn't chatter at all when you're working hard wood. And the chip breaker is the new style that's on most modern planes now. It doesn't have a bump like the traditional ones did. The blade is A2 steel. I think the hardness is somewhere around 60-62, which is pretty typical for bench planes. Chip breaker is already mated to the back of the blade, so you really shouldn't have to do anything to it at all, other than, again, wipe all this oil crap off of it. I do enough of these in the run of a month that it gets to be a pain. Alright, first thing I want to do is go over and work the blade and get that ready, and then we'll come back over and I'll go through and show you some of the features that have been built into this plane. And I'll even go through and do a little extra that I don't normally do. People are forever asking me, do you have to flatten the sole? Do you have to square the sides? We'll check all that and see what it's like. And I'm taking this, as I said, right out of the box, so it's not like I've doctored one up to make the job any easier. This is what you can expect if you buy one. Let me get all that bar saw off. Maybe just before I sharpen it, I will go through and just make sure everything is tight. That doesn't fit. Occasionally the knobs come loose or wood shrinks a little bit in shipping. Just snug those down. Okay, let's work on the blade. One over here. Now, as I mentioned, this is a Trend Diamond Plate. I like it because it's double-sided. It has a 300 grit side and a 1000 grit side. This is what I start my sharpening with. This is what you can use if you want to flatten your stones. Now, one thing I want to caution you, when it's brand new, first out of the box, there's some loose diamond on there, or some diamond that will come loose fairly quickly. So what I suggest you do is just rub some steel over that surface. It doesn't take very long, but just to break down any of that loose diamond, so that if you do use this to flatten your finishing stone, you don't end up leaving embedded diamond particles that will contaminate the surface of your stone. So I'm not doing this for the benefit of the blade. I'm doing this just to kind of break that stone in a little bit and get rid of, as I mentioned, any loose diamond on there. Alright, that should be enough. Now, don't really need to do the 1000 grit side because I don't use that to do anything with the finishing stone, but I will anyway. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is take a little steel rule. This happens to be 25 thousandths of an inch thick. Doesn't matter what you use, just use the same one. And I set that on the edge of the blade. This is to forego having to polish the entire back of the blade. What I'm going to do is elevate the blade about, well, a little less than 1 degree. I'm going to stay within 1/4 of an inch of the opposite edge of the stone. I'm going to put 3 fingers to distribute the pressure as evenly as possible. Back here with this index finger, Frick, you catching this one? Mm-hmm. To keep that little blade in place so it doesn't slide around. Now, I do this a lot, so I've developed a little bit of technique. I take my pinky over here and I run it on the side of the stone just so that I can do it more rapidly instead of going all over the place. This helps me keep within that 1/4 inch track along this side of the stone. So I'll spend 10-15 seconds on this. Now the blade is going to come out of the box in one of 3 conditions. It's either going to be flat, it's going to be slightly concave, or it's going to be convex. If it's convex, I would consider that a defect, and I would return it, and wherever you bought it will certainly replace the blade. Now if we turn this over and look, now I'm basing this criteria on the result I see with this little ruler trick. So what you see over here is a uniform strip out there at the end of my finger. That means that this blade is almost perfectly flat. You can see where I worked it on that 300 grit side, and it left a little bit of a hollow in here, but that wasn't very much work, so this is really close to being right on. They don't always come like this, but more and more I'm seeing them like this, and I go through and do this probably 50 times a year as I go around to various retail locations demonstrating these tools. We always take them right out of the box. Now I'm going to go a step further that I don't normally do, and I'm going to use an 8000 grit Shapton ceramic stone next. I'm going to wet it down, and I use this just because I have it. This is the diamond lapping plate. It's made by Shapton. Only downside is it's almost $400. So I'll bring that into being flat, and then while I'm doing it, I'm going to work on, really I should have done that the other way around in case there was any crust contamination, but honestly I've never had an issue with it. Would have been smarter to start on the 16 and then go to the 8, but I didn't. Must be nervous. Okay, so what I'm going to do that's a little bit different is instead of going right from the 1000 over to the 16, I'm going to take an in-between stop. So I'm going to set that little steel rule, same steel rule obviously, hold it in place, and I'll spend 15 or 20 seconds. Same idea, stay within the 1/4 inch edge, or within 1/4 of an inch of the edge. 3 fingers applying even downward pressure, light to moderate. Harder you push, the less control you have, and the more likely you are to screw something up. So it doesn't have to be extremely forceful. Now we'll just flip this over and see if... Okay, so we're getting a uniform polish. I don't know if you can pick that up on the camera or not, but that's the 8000 grit, and we can take it up a lot higher. We'll bump over here to the 16,000. Now, just so that you know exactly what I'm doing, I'm using a product called Honrite, which is a water additive that prevents water from rusting metal. That way I can safely use it on this diamond plate, as well as it's safe to use on my ceramic stones, which normally are just lubricated with water. So on the 16,000 grit, I'll spend the same 10 to 15 seconds. Had a customer bring up the fact that he thought going from 1000 to 16 was too extreme, or too big of a jump. I've never had any issues with it, but I thought I'd try it anyway. That should be enough. Now we'll take a look at that, and that should raise the level of polish up a notch. And if you get the light just right. Now that, I mean, this is the luck of the draw, because that's almost a perfectly flat blade. As I said, they don't all come like that, but slight slightly concave, which would create a bit of an arc there, is perfectly acceptable as well. All right, now let's do the bevel. I'm going to start over here on the 1000 grit diamond stone. Set the blade down on the primary bevel. Raise it up just a few degrees. Doesn't take very long. This diamond plate is brand new. We just took it out of the box, so it'll only take 5 or 10. It'll only take 10 seconds to get a burr on the back side, and I can detect the burr corner to corner. So once I do that, I leave that stone. Now this is where I'm going to throw another little extra step. I'm going to come to the 8000. Set the blade down on the primary bevel. Raise up just a little bit higher than I did on that 1000. I'll spend about 10 seconds on this one. All 4 fingers on the cutting edge, exerting even downward pressure. Again, light to medium, light to moderate. And then as a final step, I'll come over here. Now I'm going to do a little something different on this stone. This is my 16,000 grit. Set the blade on the primary, raise it up a little bit higher than I did on that last 8,000 grit. And on this one I'll spend 10 seconds. And at the end of the 10 seconds, I'm going to exert downward pressure on one corner for about 3 seconds. And then downward pressure on the opposite corner for about 3 seconds. Then I'll take my little steel rule, and just to get rid of any burr that may be left, turn the blade over, working the opposite 1/4 inch edge. 3 or 4 seconds right there. Okay. That's all it takes. So the blade is ready to go. Now let's go back and look this plane over before we actually try it. Just want to make sure all the moisture's off of there. And if you want a close-up on this, if this is new to anyone, the idea behind raising the blade up off, blade up off of the primary bevel and elevating the blade up off the back is to simply reduce the surface area that has to be worked. So, can you pick up that little polished strip?
I can, yeah.
Little wee small bit of metal has to be polished on that side, and it meets the little wee small bit of metal polished on this side, giving you your cutting edge, which both surfaces have been ground up there, polished up to 16,000 grit, so we should really get a nice shaving off of this. Now I'm going to put the blade, the back chip breaker, back iron, whatever you want to call it, put it on, pull it back here before you swing it over. Actually, I'll loosen that up a little bit. And then I can squeeze it like this. I got lots of control. I can move that forward, get it to within a 32nd or so of the edge, and then snug that down. And you want that to be good and tight, because it has to do with the function of the tool. I'm going to set that aside. Okay, so what's new about this? Well, from the first things we did, this was a while back. Now I get paid occasionally to offer some input to these planes. We took the old handle, which I felt was too short, and I also felt that it was too upright. We made a new one. We took advantage of the extra height we had, so we gained a little bit that way, and we tipped it forward. So if you've got a large hand, you'll find this is a lot more comfortable. And it's designed to be a 3-finger grip, so bottom 3 fingers, index finger lays along the side. Okay, let's take this apart and just show you what's inside, because a lot of the new features are actually associated with the frog. And in case you're really new to this, the frog is this part that supports the blade. I'm backing off what are called the frog retaining screws. And as I pull this out, I'll clean this off too. If you've ever examined the frog and the way it mates to the body of an old Stanley plane or even a current Stanley plane, there's not very much surface area. And when you compare it to the large milled surface area on these planes, again patterned after the original bedrocks, it's substantial. So it really keeps that blade still when it's being used, and you don't end up with any chatter. So these are called frog retaining pins. And the frog retaining pins go down through the frog. They've got a little divot on the top end that shows you that there's a cone-shaped hole on this face side. And these screws, which are called frog retaining screws, are pointed. I'll get that out and I'll show you. Okay? And they're set to engage, not like that, but just below center. So that as you tighten this frog retaining screw, that point, that cone, bears down on the bottom side of this and pulls that pin down tight, and that holds that frog firmly. But the reason we want to access it from the back side is so that we can open and close the throat without having to remove the blade, the chip breaker, the lever cap. I'll show you how that functions in a moment. But these pins, one of the recent improvements that came out on these, particularly on the 4.5 and the new 5.5, these are hardened steel where they weren't before, so you don't have to worry about damaging them, which on the other ones could possibly have happened. Now let me show you the frog, because this is a part that I'm really excited about. I'm going to show you the... actually, let me grab another plane. I'll show you what I'm talking about. This is called the yoke. And the yoke, as you spin the adjuster knob, the yoke engages this, up here, Frick, this horizontal slot in the chip breaker. And as you spin the adjuster knob in a clockwise rotation, looking at it from behind, the yoke goes forward, pushes on this chip breaker, and you have a blade projecting a little bit farther for heavier shaving. Do the opposite and it retracts it. But if you look on this yoke, particularly this one, which is made out of bronze, you can see how there's been some shaving on the back side. And actually there's some scraping on the front as well. Because what happens, if you look at the profile of this, it's shaped kind of like a wedge or a triangle, somewhat modified triangle. And as a result, when it goes into this hole, it actually scrapes on this bottom corner in one direction, and on the opposite back corner on the other direction. Well, I thought about that and I said, boy, there's a lot of friction there. So what we did with this new one is we put a round surface on both sides. So now what happens is this round surface remains tangent to the inside flat surface of the chip breaker. So what it does, it reduces all of that friction that you would have otherwise had, whether you're advancing or retracting. Beautiful addition or improvement to these tools, and it makes a huge difference in how easily you can adjust it. Now, if you've got a Woodriver plane, an older version, there's a fair bit of slop, that's often referred to as backlash, which is the difference between how much you have to turn going from advancing to retracting. And I've got one here that would easily take 2 full rotations. We'll stop and when we put this together, we'll check this, but some of them are down as good now as just 1/3 of a turn. So the machining on the adjuster knob is much better than it was. The way that these ears of the frog fit on the adjuster knob is much better. There was just a whole bunch of places where we could remove a little bit of slop, and as a result we get a much better performance out of the tool. So I'm going to put this back in place. This piece has to go inside this slot and that center screw. And as I mentioned, these frog retaining pins have holes in them on the top side to indicate where that little divot is, or that cone-shaped hole is. So that when you put these in, you want to make sure those divots are pointing straight back, so that when you tighten up these frog retaining screws, they engage properly. And I always like to keep my finger over here, like my finger on here, so that I can feel that should just turn just a little bit as the screw engages, and that way you know it's meeting it the way it's supposed to. Now I want those snug. Now I find sometimes that this lateral adjustment lever can be a little bit too stiff. So if you just bend it up a little bit, that takes some of the friction, or takes some of the rub surface, reduces some of the area that is rubbing, is what I should have said. Just wiggle that a little bit, and then you can kind of push it back down into place. You don't want it rubbing on the back side of the blade, but you don't want it to be really hard to move either. That's got a bearing on it, and that bearing fits in the long slot of the blade, and that reduces friction too when you're making your lateral adjustment. Alright, this is all cleaned off. We'll try it first. The job of the plane is to get the piece of wood smooth. So I'm not going to go beyond what it takes to do that. But I will show you a few things you can do if you want to check it and go a little bit farther. I typically don't. I'm going to put a piece of wood in here. We'll start with just a piece of pine. Easy to plane, and then we'll go up to a piece of maple. So I'm going to set the blade in. Careful not to bump the edge on anything as I set that down. There's 3 points of contact you want to be aware of. You want the yoke to fit inside the slot in the chip breaker. You want the bearing at the bottom of the lateral adjustment lever to fit inside the slot in the blade, and sometimes that's a snug fit, so it actually might snap into place. And you want the back of the blade to sit firmly on the face of the frog, so I don't want any debris on there. Set the lever cap on. Now you want sufficient pressure here that the blade won't move accidentally when you're using it, but not so much pressure that you can't make adjustments. So I'm going to back that cap screw off a little bit and then just kind of judge based on this. And it could be a little bit tighter than that. That moves quite freely. So I'll snug it up just a little bit more. Nice thing is once you get it, you shouldn't have to adjust it again, because every time you take the blade out to sharpen it, it's going to come right back to the same spot. So that feels alright. Now I'm going to flip the plane over, wipe one way, and then I'm going to advance the blade. And from doing this on numerous planes, I tell you, this is so smooth. By the way, one of the other improvements that was made when we switched to the V3, a larger diameter adjuster knob, which gives you greater leverage, and heavier knurling or deeper knurling means you can actually get some good torque on that. So much easier to perform or to use. Okay, so I'm sighting down the sole, and I do that by just looking down the sole and then dropping it slightly. And right here in the mouth, I've got the blade projecting. And it's showing up as a thin black line, but I see more of it on the left than I do on the right. So I'm going to take the lateral adjustment lever with my thumb underneath the blade, and I'm going to squeeze the edge of the blade, and my thumb is on the adjuster, the lateral adjustment lever. I'm going to squeeze the two together until that high side drops down. And actually it went completely out of sight, so I'll advance the blade a little bit more, and now the blade appears to be parallel to the sole. So I'm going to retract it. I'm going to pull it all the way back in. Make a little bit of wax. A piece of candle will do. Just want it hard enough that it won't gum up on the sole, but not so soft that hard enough that it doesn't gum up on the sole, and yet soft enough that it'll leave a little bit of residue. Okay, so I'm going to start planing. And what I like about this style of plane over others is that while planing, I can start to spin that adjuster knob. And I'm doing it with one finger, so the fact that it moves so much easier now is a real bonus. But as I plane and spin the adjuster knob, I'm slowly advancing that blade. And the first thing I want to determine is whether or not the blade is truly parallel to the sole, which means the first shaving should be across the full width of the blade. And that's pretty much what it looks like. So I'll go a little bit heavier. Okay, and you can pretty much tell when the shaving comes out. If it veers to one side or the other, then it's typically heavier on one side than the other. And you just play around with it until you get it just right. Okay, so that's coming off. That's pine, but that would probably measure some in the neighborhood of 0.8 of a thou. If I had my digital Mitutoyo working, I could measure it for you, but I'm out of batteries. Alright, so here's a piece of bird's eye maple. Let's see what that'll do. I'm going to retract the blade, do the same thing I did, a little more wax, pull the blade in, start planing, and then slowly advance. Okay, so there's a piece of eastern maple, bird's eye maple, and that shaving would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of a thou as well. Maybe even thinner. Sometimes we can get these down below a 1/2 thou. Maple seems to be the easiest to do that with. It has a tendency to stay together, where some woods just come apart at that thinness. That thinness? Or should it be that thickness? Could have invented a word there. I'm bringing that blade out just a little bit more each time to see if I can't. Okay. Now, what I want to do is check the sole and to see how flat it is. And what I'm going to use is a piece of 3/4 inch float glass. I'm going to use some 320 grit self-adhesive sandpaper. I'm going to leave the blade in the plane so that it's under the same pressure that it would be when you're using it, but I'm going to retract it. And that'll give us some idea of how flat these are out of the box. I'm often quoted as saying that they're literally ready to use out of the box. See if I'm right. Now this is float glass, and if you do a little search on float glass, it's solidified on molten tin, so it is flat, whereas plate glass, which comes out of some form of a press, isn't necessarily flat. Now I'm just going to use a little brush to get some of that metal out of the paper. Okay, so the blade is retracted. I'm going to use the same downward pressure that I would use if we were planing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a felt tip marker. I'm just going to put a few lines on the sole so that we can see where the metal comes off a little bit easier. Okay, don't want to do a whole lot. Okay, so if we look at that, I don't see a lot coming off anywhere in particular, or any faster in one spot than the other. Maybe up there a little bit. Let me give it a go for about 30 seconds. So I'm pushing down center of the plane, same amount front and back. The glass is just free to float, so hopefully I'm not deflecting that 3/4 inch glass. I'm not pushing down that hard. Okay, so we turn that over and have a look. You can see some faint part of the line. It's touching everywhere. It hasn't removed, it's removed all the line out here and along the edges. There's a little bit left in here. I haven't taken off a whole lot. The specs on this are, I believe, around 1.5 thou, and I would tend to believe that by the looks of this, that's a whole lot better than 1.5 thou over the length of the sole. But again, the real test is, does it work? Does it make your wood smooth and give you a straight edge? And I'd say the answer to that was yes. Now, will it hold those kind of tolerances on the longer plane? Well, the guarantee is that it does, so if you find it doesn't, take it back. All right, one more thing I want to do before we'll close this. I'm going to take a file, and I just want to break the sharp edges. And I do this to prevent the plane from getting dings on the sole as a result of bumping up against something metal. You bump up against something, you leave a nick on the corner that ends up protruding out the bottom, and then when you're planing, you've got a mark on your wood. And I've seen people chase the sharpening on their blade for an hour trying to find out what's wrong, and it was actually a little bump on the sole. So cut a chamfer like that. Don't forget the toe and the heel. This one's a little more difficult because of the shape. The longer planes, that's just rounded over in the back. It's just to forge a little bit of protection. You're going to have to really ding that corner hard at this point in order to raise a bump. Now, sometimes when they cut out the mouth, it leaves a bit of a burr right here, but I don't feel any there, and it would wear off eventually anyway, but I would prefer to get rid of it if it was there now before I start using the plane. Alright, let's put that piece of maple back in. I don't expect the performance to change any. And if you feel that, you can't reach through the camera and feel it, but if you could, that is as smooth as you could get. You're not going to improve that with any grit of sandpaper. Good fancy that I had pulled that blade up quite a bit to make sure I didn't touch it on that glass. It's a little heavy, I can pull it in some. $169.95. I don't think you can get a better, I know you can't get a better plane for that kind of money. And as I said, they're that ready that you're within 15 minutes of being able to use it. Okay, thanks for watching. You go to my YouTube channel, there's a lot more videos on there walking you through various hand tools and methods. And if you're really interested in this, you can go to my site, RobCosman.com. And if you respond to us on there, we'll give you a free month and you can try it out and see if it's something that you like. We offer 5 half-hour training episodes a week covering both construction with merely hand tools and also a separate one where we do both hand tools and power tools. Okay, see you in the shop soon.